December 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The temperature outside the aluminum skin of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress Lady Luck registered at -52 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, a 20-year-old ball turret gunner from Boston, Massachusetts, squinted through his gun sight, scanning the clear blue sky for the dark silhouettes of Luftwaffe fighters he knew would come. The men of the 385th Bomb Group were confident that their practiced marksmanship and defensive firepower would see them safely home to Grafton Underwood Air Base. They had no idea how fundamentally wrong their combat doctrine would prove to be. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a revolutionary shift in aerial gunnery techniques not only tripled the defensive kill rate of American heavy bombers, but fundamentally transformed how the United States Army Air Forces understood the psychology of combat and the mathematics of survival in the lethal skies over Nazi-occupied Europe. High above the cloud layer, the formation of 41 B-17 Flying Fortresses droned steadily eastward. The low winter sun glinted off their aluminum skins as they arranged themselves in the signature combat box formation, a three-dimensional checkerboard of bombers designed to create interlocking fields of defensive fire. The lead aircraft, the Berlin Express, carried Major William Harding, a 34-year-old former mathematics professor from Cornell University, who now commanded the 385th High Squadron. "Navigator, time to target?" Harding asked through the interphone system. Lieutenant Samuel Goldstein consulted his charts and E6B computer. 27 minutes to initial point, sir. Wind drift is minimal. We're right on course. Roger that. Bombardier, stand by for initial approach. Gunners, keep your eyes peeled. Intelligence says we can expect heavy fighter opposition over the target area. In the waist gunner position of Lady Luck, 6 aircraft back in the formation, Technical Sergeant James Cooper methodically checked his twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns for the 3rd time since takeoff. The 23-year-old former duck hunter from rural Minnesota had scored 4 confirmed kills in his 17 previous missions. His hands, despite the electrically heated gloves, felt stiff in the sub-zero temperatures that permeated the unpressurized bomber. "Hey, Donovan," Cooper called through the intercom to the ball turret gunner suspended below the aircraft's belly. "How you holding up down there in your little glass coffin?" "Just peachy, Coop," came the sardonic reply. "Nothing I enjoy more than being crammed in a fetal position with my rear end hanging out in 50 below temperatures. You see anything up there yet?" "Sky's clear, but they'll come, they always do." In the cockpit, Captain Robert Mitchell, the aircraft commander and pilot, adjusted the mixture controls of his 4 Wright R-1892 Cyclone radial engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower. The 26-year-old from Philadelphia maintained a disciplined scan of his instruments while periodically checking their position in the formation. "Co-pilot, keep an eye on number 3 engine," Mitchell instructed Lieutenant David Wilson. "Oil pressure's fluctuating a bit." "Yes, sir, watching it," Wilson replied, making a note on his clipboard. In the navigator's compartment, Lieutenant Thomas Reed carefully tracked their progress on his charts. The 24-year-old from Chicago had completed 21 missions, more than anyone else on the crew. They needed 25 to complete their tour and return home, a statistical improbability that haunted every man aboard. "Bogies, 3 o'clock high." The sudden shout from Technical Sergeant Walter Schmidt, the right waist gunner, galvanized the entire crew. "Looks like Focke-Wulf 190s, I count at least 8 of them." Cooper swiveled his guns toward the threat, his heart rate instantly doubling as adrenaline surged through his system. He could see the German fighters now, their distinctive silhouettes growing larger against the deep blue sky as they maneuvered for an attack run. "Everybody stay sharp," Captain Mitchell called over the interphone. "Remember your training. Lead them properly and fire in controlled bursts. Don't waste ammunition." This was standard doctrine for American aerial gunnery. Wait until you can clearly identify the target, lead it according to its angle of approach, and fire in short, controlled bursts to avoid overheating the guns and wasting precious ammunition. Every gunner aboard Lady Luck had spent countless hours practicing these techniques on the ground and in training flights. The first wave of Focke-Wulf 190 fighters came in fast from 4 o'clock high, their 20mm cannons blazing. Cooper tracked the lead aircraft through his sight, mentally calculating the proper lead, and squeezed his trigger when the fighter entered what he judged to be effective range, about 800 yards. His tracers appeared to pass harmlessly behind the rapidly approaching German aircraft. Cooper adjusted his aim, fired again, and missed. The Focke-Wulf bore in relentlessly, its wing-mounted cannons spitting fire. Suddenly the bomber shuddered violently as cannon shells tore through its aluminum skin. "We're hit!" someone shouted over the intercom. "Number 2 engines smoking." Captain Mitchell fought the controls as the damaged bomber momentarily fell out of formation. "Damage report. Hydraulic line severed in the radio room," called Technical Sergeant Howard Freeman, the radio operator. "I'm patching it now, no casualties." Mitchell struggled to bring the wounded aircraft back into position as the German fighters regrouped for another attack. Across the formation, other bombers were similarly engaged, their defensive guns chattering frantically as they tried to ward off the determined attackers. Despite the intensity of the defensive fire, the German fighters seemed to strike with impunity, darting through the formation and disappearing before the American gunners could effectively track them. By the time the raid on Bremen was complete, the 385th Bomb Group had lost 7 aircraft, almost 17% of their force. Lady Luck limped back to Grafton Underwood with over 100 holes in her fuselage and wings, 1 engine shut down, and their ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, nursing a flesh wound in his left arm where a fragment of shrapnel had penetrated his position. The debriefing that followed was somber and frustrating. Major Harding sat at the head of the long table in the briefing room as crew after crew reported similar experiences. They had followed their training to the letter, yet the German fighters had seemed almost immune to their defensive fire. "I had a perfect bead on a Messerschmitt 109, reported Lieutenant Wilson Green, a top turret gunner from another aircraft. "I did everything by the book, proper lead, controlled bursts, and I still missed him. These Krauts are getting better at evading our fire." Major Harding listened intently, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. As the debriefing concluded, he remained seated, staring at his calculations with a troubled expression. Captain Mitchell approached him. "Something on your mind, Major?" Harding looked up. "It's the mathematics of the situation, Mitchell. They don't add up. Our gunners are well trained. Our weapons are reliable, but our effectiveness is dismal. The kill ratios are all wrong." Mitchell nodded grimly. "We lost 7 bombers today. Intelligence says we maybe got 3 of theirs. That's not a sustainable exchange rate." "No, it's not," Harding agreed. "And if we don't figure out why, we're going to lose this air war." 2 days later, Major Harding called a special meeting in the base theatre. Present were gunnery officers from all 4 squadrons of the bomb group, along with selected experienced gunners, including Technical Sergeant James Cooper from Lady Luck. Harding stood before a chalkboard on which he had drawn a series of diagrams and mathematical equations. "Gentlemen, we have a serious problem. Our current gunnery doctrine is fundamentally flawed, and it's getting our boys killed." A murmur ran through the assembled men. Criticism of established doctrine was unusual, especially from a squadron commander. "Let me explain," Harding continued, pointing to his diagrams. "When a fighter approaches a bomber, we've been teaching our gunners to track the target, establish a proper lead and fire when the fighter enters effective range. About 1,000 yards for early detection, though practical effective range is closer to 700 yards. He drew a line on the board. "The problem is that a Focke-Wulf 190 approaching at 300 miles per hour covers approximately 440 feet per second. Human reaction time, even for a well-trained gunner, averages about 0.25 seconds between observation and action. That means by the time you see the fighter, recognize it, determine its course, calculate the proper lead and fire, the target has moved over 100 feet from where you first spotted it." Cooper leaned forward, intensely interested. This mathematical approach was something he'd never considered. "Furthermore," Harding continued, "our 50 caliber rounds travel at approximately 2,800 feet per second, which seems fast, until you consider the distances involved. At 500 yards, it takes about half a second for the bullet to reach the target zone. During that time, a fighter moving at right angles to the bullet path will have traveled another 220 feet. He turned to face the men directly. In other words, gentlemen, we're asking our gunners to solve a complex three-dimensional trigonometry problem involving multiple moving objects, compensating for wind, aircraft movement, gravity, and bullet drop, all while under enemy fire, in sub-zero temperatures with limited visibility, and often while wounded or oxygen-deprived. The room had gone completely silent. "It's not that our gunners aren't good," Harding said. "It's that we're asking them to do something that's nearly impossible under combat conditions." Captain Edward Robinson, the group gunnery officer, stood up. "What are you suggesting, Major? That we abandon defensive gunnery altogether?" "Quite the opposite, Captain," Harding replied. "I'm suggesting we revolutionize it." He erased the board and drew a new diagram. "We need to stop thinking about aerial gunnery as marksmanship and start thinking about it as creating a defensive field of fire." He sketched a B-17 in the center of the board, then drew radiating lines representing fields of fire from each gun position. "Instead of waiting to fire until we have a perfect shot, I propose that we start firing before the enemy fighter enters what we consider effective range." This statement was met with looks of disbelief. "That would waste ammunition," one of the gunnery officers objected. "We're limited to how many rounds we can carry." "Would it?" Harding asked. "Let me introduce you to a concept from mathematics and probability theory. It's called a probability field." For the next hour, Major Harding explained his radical new approach. By analyzing combat reports, gun camera footage, and applying mathematical models, he had determined that the most effective defensive technique wasn't careful aimed fire, but creating a curtain or field of bullets through which enemy fighters would have to fly. If we start firing at 1,000 yards, before we can realistically expect to hit anything, and maintain a steady fire along the fighter's projected path, we create a statistical probability of hits that's actually higher than if we wait for the perfect shot, he explained. "It's counterintuitive, I know, but the mathematics are sound." Cooper raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, they taught us in gunnery school to conserve ammunition. Won't we run out before the mission is over if we fire this way?" Harding nodded. "That's a legitimate concern, Sergeant, but I've calculated that too." He turned to a new page of calculations. The average combat engagement with enemy fighters lasts about 6 minutes. Even with this new technique, we'd use less than 50% of our ammunition load, and if this method proves even half as effective as my calculations suggest, we'll face fewer attacks overall, which would actually conserve ammunition in the long run. The discussion continued late into the night, with many gunners and officers initially skeptical. But Major Harding's mathematical approach was compelling, and the stark reality of their losses demanded new thinking. The following week, 8 crews were selected to test the new technique in a series of training exercises using camera guns against target drones. Among them was the crew of Lady Luck, with Technical Sergeant Cooper eager to try the new approach. At the gunnery range, Cooper positioned himself at his waist gun position, tracking a target sleeve being towed by a P-40 fighter at varying distances and angles. "Remember," Major Harding instructed through a megaphone, "don't wait for the perfect shot. Start firing early at the outer edge of your range and maintain fire as the target approaches and passes. We're creating a field of probability, not taking sniper shots." Cooper found the technique alien at first. Every instinct from his training screamed that he was wasting ammunition by firing before he had a reasonable expectation of hitting the target. But as the exercise progressed, the camera gun footage revealed something surprising. His hit percentage was significantly higher using the new method. After 3 days of intensive training, the 8 test crews were ready to try the new technique in actual combat. The mission, an attack on submarine pens at Kiel, Germany, scheduled for January 6, 1944. The night before the mission, Cooper couldn't sleep. He paced the barracks, smoking cigarette after cigarette, mentally rehearsing the new gunnery technique. "You're wearing a hole in the floor, Coop," said Michael Donovan, his arms still bandaged from their previous mission. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Cooper replied. "This new technique, it goes against everything we've been taught." Donovan shrugged. So did flying airplanes once upon a time. Someone had to be the first to think different. At 0400 hours, the crews were awakened for the mission. After a breakfast of powdered eggs, bacon and coffee, they attended the mission briefing. Major Harding was present, along with Colonel James Bradford, the group commander. "Gentlemen," Colonel Bradford began, "today's mission to Kiel is a strategic priority, but it's also a test of Major Harding's new defensive gunnery technique. The 8 crews who have been training in this method will be distributed throughout the formation. The rest of you will continue to employ standard gunnery doctrine." He paused, looking around the room. "I don't need to tell you how important this is. If this new technique works as Major Harding believes it will, it could significantly reduce our losses and increase our effectiveness. Good hunting and good luck." 2 hours later, the 385th Bomb Group was airborne, 40 bombers climbing steadily toward their operational altitude of 28,000 feet. Lady Luck flew in the high squadron, her 4 engines thundering as she took her place in the formation. In the waist gunner position, Cooper performed his pre-combat checks methodically. His mind focused on the new technique he would employ when, not if, the German fighters appeared. "Bandits, 9 o'clock level." The call came from the navigator, Lieutenant Reed, who had spotted the first wave of German interceptors, a mixed group of Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. Cooper swung his guns to the left, scanning the sky. He spotted the fighters immediately, small dots growing larger as they approached the formation from the left flank. Normally, he would have waited until they were within 700 yards before opening fire. But today, as soon as he had them in sight at approximately 1,200 yards, he began firing in controlled bursts, adjusting his aim to create a field of fire along their projected approach path. Around him, he could hear the other guns of Lady Luck opening up, much earlier than usual. Across the formation, the 8 test crews were creating a much denser field of defensive fire than the Germans had previously encountered. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The first wave of fighters, expecting to encounter defensive fire only when they closed to their usual attack distance, flew directly into a wall of 50 caliber bullets. Cooper watched in amazement as one of the Messerschmitts suddenly erupted in flames and rolled over, its pilot bailing out moments later. "Got one!" he shouted into his intercom, though he couldn't be sure it was specifically his fire that had scored the kill. The German fighters, clearly surprised by the new defensive tactic, broke off their attack run earlier than usual, several of them trailing smoke or glycol as they peeled away. The second wave approached more cautiously, attempting to find gaps in the defensive fire. But the 8 crews employing the new technique maintained a steady barrage, starting their fire well before the Germans reached what had traditionally been considered effective range. "They're breaking off," called Lieutenant Wilson from the co-pilot's seat. "Look at that, they're not pressing the attack." Captain Mitchell's voice remained calm and professional, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. "Maintain discipline, everyone, they'll be back, but keep up this new technique, it seems to be working." The engagement continued for nearly 20 minutes, with repeated waves of German fighters attempting to break through to the bomber formation. But each time, they were met with an unprecedented volume of defensive fire that began well before they expected. By the time Lady Luck and the rest of the formation reached Kiel, dropped their bombs, and turned for home, the results were clear. The 385th had lost only 2 aircraft, both from squadrons using the traditional gunnery technique, while claiming 11 German fighters destroyed and 9 more probably destroyed. The debriefing that followed was electric with excitement. Major Harding stood before a blackboard where the results were tabulated. Preliminary analysis shows that the 8 crews using the new defensive field technique achieved a kill ratio approximately 3 times higher than those using standard doctrine, he announced. More significantly, none of the aircraft employing the new technique were shot down, though 3 sustained damage. Colonel Bradford stood up. "Gentlemen, based on today's results, I am directing that all gunners in the 385th Bomb Group be immediately retrained in Major Harding's defensive field technique. Training will begin tomorrow at 0800 hours. Over the next month, all gunners in the 8th Air Force were retrained in what came to be known as the Harding Field Technique. Combat reports consistently showed a dramatic improvement in defensive effectiveness and a corresponding reduction in bomber losses. Technical Sergeant James Cooper completed his 25th mission on February 12, 1944, and returned to the United States as a gunnery instructor, teaching the new technique to thousands of gunners preparing to join the air war over Europe. Major William Harding continued to refine his mathematical approach to aerial combat, developing additional innovations that further improved bomber survivability. By March 1944, bomber losses across the 8th Air Force had decreased by nearly 40%, while claims of enemy fighters destroyed had more than doubled. On a cold morning in April 1944, Technical Sergeant Cooper, now Staff Sergeant Cooper following his promotion, stood before a class of 30 eager young gunners at Harlingen Gunnery School in Texas. "Gentlemen," he began, "forget everything you think you know about aerial gunnery. Today, we're going to learn how mathematics and probability, not just marksmanship, will keep you alive over Nazi Germany." A young trainee raised his hand. "Sergeant, I heard we're supposed to start shooting before we can even see the targets clearly. That doesn't make any sense." Cooper smiled. "That's exactly what I thought too, about 4 months and 15 missions ago. Let me tell you a story about a mission to Bremen and how a former math professor changed the way we fight this air war." The impact of the Harding field technique extended far beyond improving defensive gunnery effectiveness. It represented a fundamental shift in how the United States Army Air Forces approached the problem of air combat, moving from an individualistic, marksmanship-based paradigm to a statistical, systems-based approach that considered the realities of human performance under combat conditions. By May 1944, as the air war intensified in preparation for the D-Day landings, the improved defensive capabilities of American bombers forced the Luftwaffe to change their tactics as well. German fighters increasingly avoided direct attacks on bomber formations, instead attempting to pick off stragglers or damaged aircraft on the periphery. This reduced the effectiveness of German interceptors and contributed to the gradual achievement of Allied air superiority over Europe. The story of the Harding field technique also illustrates a broader point about warfare in the industrial age. That success often depends not on individual heroism or skill, though these remain important, but on the systematic application of scientific principles, statistical analysis, and an understanding of human factors in combat. After the war, William Harding returned to Cornell University, where he established one of the first academic programs in operations research, a field that applies advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. Many of his students went on to distinguished careers in both military and civilian applications of mathematical modeling to complex problems. James Cooper returned to Minnesota after the war, using the mathematical principles he had learned to establish a successful engineering firm that specialized in designing efficient systems for agricultural production. He often credited his wartime experience with teaching him to question established doctrines and seek solutions based on data rather than tradition. Michael Donovan, the ball turret gunner who had been wounded over Bremen, became a commercial airline pilot after the war. He maintained a lifelong correspondence with both Cooper and Harding, and the three men held a reunion every December 17th until Harding's death in 1982. The Harding field technique remains a classic case study in military training programs around the world, not just for its specific application to aerial gunnery, which became obsolete with the advent of jet aircraft and guided missiles, but for its demonstration of how mathematical thinking and systems analysis can overcome seemingly intractable problems. The Boeing B-17 Lady Luck survived the war, completing 78 combat missions before being returned to the United States in June 1945. After briefly serving as a training aircraft, she was scrapped at Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona in 1946, one of thousands of bombers deemed unnecessary in the post-war demobilization. Yet the lessons learned aboard her and other B-17s over the skies of Nazi Germany continue to resonate. The willingness to question established doctrine, apply rigorous analysis to combat data, and implement counterintuitive solutions when the evidence supports them remains a vital aspect of military effectiveness. Perhaps the most important legacy of Major Harding's innovation was its influence on American military thinking during the early Cold War. The systems analysis approach pioneered by Harding and others during World War II evolved into the sophisticated operations research methodologies employed by organizations like RAND Corporation, which played a crucial role in developing American nuclear strategy and conventional warfighting doctrines. The story of how B-17 gunners started firing before seeing targets and tripled their kill rate is not just a fascinating historical anecdote. It represents a pivotal moment in the evolution of modern warfare, when mathematical analysis began to systematically inform tactical decisions, and when the understanding of human performance limitations became a central consideration in weapons system design and combat doctrine. In 1957, 13 years after the events described, a reunion of the 385th Bomb Group was held in Chicago. During the banquet, a now-graying James Cooper approached William Harding, who had recently been appointed as a civilian consultant to the newly established United States Air Force. "You know, Major," Cooper said, still using Harding's wartime rank, "I've thought about those days a lot. About how many lives your crazy mathematical theory saved." Harding smiled. "It wasn't that crazy, Cooper. It was just a matter of seeing the problem clearly, not as we wished it to be, but as it actually was." "Still," Cooper persisted, "it took courage to challenge the established doctrine. Not many officers would have done that." "Perhaps," Harding conceded, "but remember what was at stake. Mathematics doesn't care about military tradition or established doctrine. It cares about truth. And in war, truth is often the difference between life and death." As the evening wore on, more veterans joined their table, each with their own stories of how the Harding field technique had affected their combat experiences. Michael Donovan, now a captain with Trans World Airlines, raised his glass in a toast. "To mathematics," he said with a grin, "the most unexpected secret weapon of the 8th Air Force." The men laughed and clinked their glasses, but beneath the camaraderie was the solemn knowledge that their shared experience had not just been about mathematical theories or gunnery techniques. It had been about survival in one of history's most lethal environments, about finding ways to accomplish their mission while bringing as many of their comrades home as possible. In that sense, the story of the Harding field technique is ultimately about the human dimension of warfare, about how innovation, analysis, and the courage to question established wisdom can save lives even in the midst of history's most destructive conflicts. As the sun set over Chicago that evening in 1957, the veterans of the 385th Bomb Group, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and gunners alike, represented a living testament to how human ingenuity can find solutions to seemingly impossible problems, even in the darkest hours of global conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.